As it relates to undocked healthcare, yeah, I'm proud of that because I believe in universal healthcare. Others may say it. I did it. First state in the country, regardless of pre-existing conditions, ability to pay, and regardless of your immigration status. I promised that. I promoted it. I ran 3 times on it. I did it when I was mayor.
So we've spoken pretty extensively about the Minnesota fraud situation, but what I want people to understand is that it's not just exclusively a Minnesota or Tim Walz issue. This is a Democrat Party issue nationwide. As a matter of fact, I think it would be highly irresponsible to speak about famous cases of mass welfare fraud and money laundering without discussing my home state of California, because as we speak, new questions and reinvestigations are happening into the subject matter of how exactly Gavin Newsom's state government has lost so many billions of dollars due to blatant embezzlement throughout the years. And on top of that, we even have some new controversy with Gavin Newsom admitting this week that he is blatantly violating federal law by proudly giving out Medicaid and free healthcare to illegal aliens. Of course, the very conspiracy theory they told us for many months was not actually happening. But folks, as we look at all of this, I want you to examine for a moment, and perhaps this is the central question that should exist behind all of it. How exactly is it that when you vote for Democrats and they raise taxes and they spend so much money, quality of life in no way gets better, right? And in fact, it gets ostensibly worse. Actually, the roads get worse. The homelessness gets worse. You probably ask the question to yourself sometimes, where are the liberal policies in action? Because after all, the traditional, at least 1990s view of American politics is like, hey, look, so if I vote Republican, I get lower taxes but less social benefit. If I vote Democrat, I get higher taxes but more social benefit. Yet in that case, it should be awfully interesting and strange as to why, if you live in California, a state where the taxes are astronomically high, the top tax bracket for state income tax is about 13%, affordability is through the roof. How exactly is it, for instance, that a state like that has so many homeless, right? Like, shouldn't the liberal policies be spending money? Why are the roads so bad? I thought we're voting Democrats so that way we get more public investment. And yet it is currently the case that California and many other blue states are actually facing the opposite. Massive budgetary shortfalls. Their states are operating in a deficit, which you should again ask, if I'm paying so much in taxes, how could this be the case? Well, the answer is actually very simple, because as we've been saying in all these different videos on the subject, the Democrat Party is barely even a political entity. It is merely a criminal organization. So if you want the answer as to why you pay so much in taxes, the state budget is so high, and yet all of the issues you would think you would vote for liberals to fix just keep getting worse, this is the answer, because the money, of course, is being embezzled and laundered out to other places. Because you're basically watching an old school case of mafia style political corruption. Turns out that stuff still does exist today, and it's playing out in blue states nationwide. And as I've been saying, by the way, isn't it interesting how, if we're to believe this whole criminal enterprise theory, the supposed politics of Democrats and liberals are awfully convenient, right? They say, oh, we want to raise taxes because we have to pay for more social programs. No, it's not. It's because it gives you way more money to launder. Oh, we need to address this so-and-so social problem by giving money to this nonprofit that's going to feed kids or fix the roads or fix homelessness, and then it never gets done. It's like, yeah, that seems to me like, oh, your politics are actually a convenient cover front business, right, for the real crime that's going on behind the scenes, which is money laundering. Same point, by the way, we've even made on crime policy, right? If the Democrats exist to protect the criminals, but you don't want to say, yeah, we're bought out by the criminals and stuff, you could easily just say, no, that's not what it is, right? We're woke. We want to let the criminals out of jail time and time again. We don't want to do anything about Somali fraud because we believe that's racist. We believe in restorative justice. No, you don't, right? No, you don't. It's a convenient freaking excuse for what's really going on here, which is you are all criminals and you're all protecting one another. Anyways, we'll get into this here today, okay? I'll tell you, first of all, about the situation in California, right? If you thought Minnesota was bad, let me tell you about that, as well as Gavin Newsom even admitting to part of it. And I'll also explain to you exactly how all this stuff happens. And, you know, again, like the whole mafia-style money laundering thing, it's very real here. I'm from this state. I know some of these stories personally. We'll get into it. First, though, do us a favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit that like button down below and subscribe to the channel if you are new. That's the best way to support our work. It also ensures that you can stay up to date with all of the latest news and coverage. And with that said, let's of course start here by asking the question on perhaps the most obvious and notable case of embezzlement in the state, which is exactly how Gavin Newsom and the state government spent $24 billion on fighting homelessness. And remember, Gavin Newsom's promise for a long time was he was going to end homelessness in California. And this, by the way, took place several years ago. And yet, when you look at California today, you probably ask, where did that money go? Right? I thought I'm voting liberal to fix these issues. Oh, well, turns out a bunch of it disappeared, according to U.S. Attorney S.A. Lee in the state of California. Take a listen.
Of where billions of California tax dollars intended to solve homelessness ended up. California has spent more than $24 billion over the last 5 years with little to no progress in solving our homelessness epidemic. California state officials failed to provide meaningful oversight over the individuals who received most of these funds, and they had little to no answers to the public's demand for accountability. Well, that accountability starts today. Today, we are announcing significant developments into our investigation. We're making public 2 criminal cases relating to 2 separate real estate developers who were involved in misappropriating millions of state funds intended to combat homelessness. This morning, federal agents arrested Cody Holmes, a 31-year-old Beverly Hills resident and the former CFO of Shangri-La Industries, a downtown LA-based developer of affordable housing, for defrauding the Home Key program that is administered by the state of California. The program awarded grant money, which included federal tax dollars, for specific projects to convert motels into housing for the homeless and to operate the units. By April of 2022, Shangri-La Industries, where Holmes was the CFO, had co-applied with multiple California cities to convert numerous properties in California, including a location in Thousand Oaks. The state asked for proof that the company had the financial capacity to build all the projects. In response, Holmes and Shangri-La knowingly submitted fake bank statements which claimed to show that developer had about $160 million on deposit. Not only were the bank statements fake, our investigation shows that Shangri-La and its affiliates had nowhere near the amount of money they claimed they had in the fake bank statements.
Oh, hey, I think I've seen this one before. That sounds awfully familiar, if not exactly identical to the multiple fraud stories we heard out of Minnesota, right? It's the same exact thing, where the state of California, what happened here? They said we're going to spend $24 billion to fight homelessness. By the way, using liberal politics as the cover story. And then in reality, what were they doing? They were asked, okay, how are you going to spend the money? Well, we're going to give it to a bunch of nonprofits who will do that work for us, right? Basically, the state's going to subcontract all these people who are supposed experts in housing, and that's what they do, and then they're going to go and fix the problem for us. Except these nonprofits were largely fake and fraudulent and essentially ran off with the money, defrauded the state of California. And notably, very interestingly, I just want to point out to people, this whole homelessness scandal, where did the money thing go, has been a kind of story in California politics for years. But the state government has done very little to stop it, much like Tim Walz and that whole situation with the feeding our futures thing, all the Somalis up there. It turns out that the state government did very little to respond to it, to crack down on it, to retrieve the money. No, it was the Trump administration and federal prosecutors who conveniently had to step in and actually care about something that clearly Democrats in that state did not ask any questions about. So yeah, happening time and time again. And in a second, we'll kind of answer the question as to what's really going on here and why it's happening. But I would like to point out that homelessness story might be the most notable out of California, but it's far from alone. As a matter of fact, there are separate questions right now as to how $800 million that was given as aid for the Pacific Palisades and Los Angeles fire victims never actually reached the victims, right? Not a single dollar. While, of course, the governor of California has basically tried to implement Section 8 in the entire place. And it's like, again, why does this type of thing keep happening? This nonprofit kind of charity fraud in California, or aid fraud, right? We'll answer in a second. First, take a listen.
Just met with a great team of criminal investigators here at the IRS. If you asked fire aid for any money, you emailed them, please send me all your correspondence. If you bought tickets, merchandise, or donated to fire aid and you have the receipt, please email that evidence to info@prattdaddy.com. I repeat, if you are a fire victim in Altadena, Pacific Palisades, Pasadena, Malibu, any fire victims, and you reached out to fire aid, please send me those correspondence and then the correspondence of whoever fire aid told you to email. Thank you so much.
Oh, gee, well, you look at that. What do you know? Yet another fraudulent charity scam operating in the state of California worth hundreds of millions of dollars. How many times do we keep watching the same story play out? Isn't that very interesting? So if you're wondering what's going on here or how this works or why it keeps happening, the kind of answer is very simple, but let me explain it to you. So essentially what happens in California is that anytime they, again, do some liberal policy, which means what? A public investment. Oh, we're going to fix the roads using the gas tax money, or we're going to fix homelessness, or we're going to address this, we're going to give healthcare to people, whatever it is, right? They usually do the work by, as I described, contracting that out to private companies, nonprofit businesses, stuff like that. And as you often see, as you just saw in the homeless situation, very often those, first of all, people they're giving the money back to, right, the kickbacks, the nonprofit owners, likely are Democrats themselves, probably close friends of Gavin Newsom or whatever. But yeah, you go and give the money to them, and then either they don't do anything and just take the money, or they do about 10% of the work, but way overbill the state government, get way more money than they're supposed to get. And then very conveniently, of course, on top of all of it, much like Minnesota, the anti-fraud mechanisms and enforcements in California are very loose, right? They basically are letting people get away with that, which is exactly corroborated as well, even when you look at simply the rates of welfare fraud that are actually happening in the state of California. I mean, take a listen to some of these numbers. So this is as it pertains now to, yes, like welfare programs, because as we established too, by the way, you know, it's not just about the contractors they're giving money to. It's also about the community as a whole, right? Basically, they understand that they can build this political machine of buying votes if they essentially allow a bunch of people who maybe shouldn't even get the free stuff or legally eligible to still get it anyway. And they just kind of wink at you and say, hey, remember what political party gave that to you? And if you guys wonder why I keep referencing the words political machines, and particularly New York City, I say that because one could argue amongst the Democrat Party, things really haven't changed. I mean, this is the Tammany Hall strategy from the late 1800s, early 1900s that they're still practicing today, which is basically buying votes through a politically corrupt method of essentially giving out free stuff and social services. Very often, notably, much like Minnesota, much like California, much like they did back like 100 years ago. It's the same exact strategy, right? To majorly immigrant populations. I mean, if you guys are curious, you guys don't know the history here, I'll just briefly read for you the Google AI overview. I mean, you basically get the idea. This is what I keep on describing, right? But just like take notes of this if you're curious. Again, like this is actually not a new strategy by Democrats at all. So New York City political machines, most famously Tammany Hall, were powerful Democrat Party organizations controlling city politics by trading city services, jobs, and favors, especially to immigrant groups like the Irish, like 100 years ago, right? For votes. Oh, isn't that interesting? Vote for me, I'll give you a government job. Vote for me, I'll give you a government contract. Same thing, they're still doing it. They haven't changed a bit, right? And primarily, who are the people who are most benefiting from the fraud in many cases? The political voter base that's been imported, right? In Minnesota, it's a bunch of migrants. In California, a bunch of migrants. Same story. Peaking in the 19th and early 20th centuries under people like Boss Tweed, but of course known for significant corruption, graft, and controlling elections through a loyal base, eventually declining with modern media and political reforms. It's almost like they haven't actually declined, right? Same stuff is still going on. It's just in a modern sense. Yeah. And of course, if you do that with enough people, if you basically buy enough votes, you can build a political supermajority in a place like California that even about 40 years ago was formerly a Republican state. Very similar situation, but of course, just worth noting, this is exactly the same story you're watching happen over again. Please take notes of that.
If you thought that Minnesota Governor Tim Walz had a real bad problem with welfare fraud in his state, Gavin Newsom saying, hold my beer, buddy. Newsom's welfare fraud is exponentially worse than Tim Walz's, but the liberal media nationally, they're not paying attention. They're not holding him accountable. There's almost no discussion of it. Newsom allowed $30 billion in fraudulent welfare payments to be issued by the unemployment agency. And now small businesses in California have to pay off all of that debt through higher payroll taxes. No coverage of that scandal. And it is much worse than what happened with Tim Walz in Minnesota. Walz is accused of allowing $250 million of food stamp fraud to occur to Somali organizations. And Newsom is sitting here with multi-billion dollars worth of food stamp fraud. His food stamp fraud rate is 13.4%. That's 3 out of every 20 benefits managed by Newsom's administration for food stamps, completely fraudulent. And when it comes to funding left-wing organizations like the Somali community in Minnesota, California is funding all sorts of left-wing NGOs. And a lot of those NGOs are using taxpayer money for politics. The liberal media isn't covering any of this.
Yeah, well, again, I say, literally nothing has changed. They're still employing the Tammany Hall strategy to this very day. And I'm sure someone's going to come and say, oh, but isn't this just kind of like normal political corruption, Vince? Aren't Republican states and Republican politicians also guilty of the same thing? And on the surface, I can understand the argument, because I'm not denying this stuff also doesn't happen in red states. I mean, sure, that's kind of just a classic case, for instance, of political corruption. Oh, I'm giving out a government contract to you. I'm going to slightly overpay what it's actually worth. You're going to take some off the top. Maybe you'll get the job done extra slow, so that way I give you more money, blah, blah, blah. Sure, that stuff happens everywhere. It's not even exclusive to the United States, right? Again, as I said, that's like just an ancient case of political corruption. Here's the difference, though, right? Sure, it's also true, by the way, that, say, kickbacks for your friends, yes, that happens in both parties. Yes, absolutely. Republican politicians get elected and they say, like, give subsidies to a certain corporation or the oil companies, whatever it is. Here's the difference, though, right? There's a difference between, let's say, Republican politicians giving extra tax breaks or subsidies to the oil companies as a political policy versus just straight up money laundering, right? It's not like, you paid a contractor to build the road and you paid them a little bit too much money and they took kind of slow, but they got it done in the end. That's actually not the same, the overpaying thing versus straight up organizations in Minnesota who just laundered the money, who just stole it, right? Like, that's not the same thing. And in no case of any Republican policy that I can find is there an example of, or anything even parallel to, let's say, massively lowering and, basically getting rid of all the anti-fraud protections that actually make sure welfare and similar types of fraud do not happen, and then silencing whistleblowers when they try to come to Tim Walz or even Gavin Newsom and say, hey, I think there's a mass fraud problem going on with the way we constructed this policy. Show me the parallel example of that in the Republican Party. No, it doesn't exist, because actually this is an exclusively Democrat issue. Not just corruption in general, right? That happens in both parties. But the specific way that Democrats are just using the kind of public office, the straight up money launder to like their friends and to a political machine of voters here, that's very unique. I will say that right now, right? And of course, It's worth noting, I mean, Gavin Newsom himself recently came out on a podcast this week and basically admitted to many of the things here we're talking about. In this case, that being Medi-Cal, right, the California Medicaid program, being given to illegal aliens. Of course, we were told by Democrats for months, oh, that's a conspiracy theory. Illegals are not receiving government welfare programs. Oh, turns out he's now just proudly saying, yes, he did it and he owns that. Take a listen.
As it relates to undocked healthcare, yeah, I'm proud of that because I believe in universal healthcare. You know, others may say it, I did it. First state in the country, regardless of pre-existing conditions, ability to pay, and regardless of your immigration status. I promised that. I promoted it. I ran 3 times on it. I did it when I was mayor. People know who I am. We failed on the border. We need to own up to that. Largest border crossing in the Western Hemisphere in my state. Spent $1 billion+ to do migrant centers, try to put a lid on things. And it was quite critical, but I tried to do it in a respectful way of the Biden administration. We failed on the border. We have to own that. But we've also failed as a consequence because of that to lead the comprehensive immigration question. We've got to get the border right, then we can get to that. But I say that to make the point. You don't need sanctuary policy in this country if we have a federal government doing its job.
Yeah, so there you have Gavin Newsom proudly admitting it's not a conspiracy theory. He's saying it publicly. Yes, we are giving free health care to illegal aliens, which is a fact. That is happening in California. Of course, Democrats, again, have tried to tell us that, oh, Medicaid is not being given to illegals because that's against federal law. Well, the thing is that when you have sanctuary states and you're not following federal law, it still happens. Why? Medicaid is administered through what? The states. Yes, the money comes from, I've had to explain this so many times. People are so dense, they just pretend not to understand. The federal law says illegals can't receive it. Yes, but it's administered through the states. And when Gavin Newsom publicly and proudly says, I'm giving Medicaid to illegals, I mean, he probably is breaking federal law by doing that. Yeah, if he's using a single dollar of federal money, which he likely is on the illegal aliens, because the money's in kind of like one single pool of Medi-Cal funding, then yeah, he is breaking federal law. But of course, like when we're dealing with a criminal organization here, I'm not exactly sure they care so much about that, do they? But that's besides the point even that we're trying to make here. It's worth noting too, by the way, we've covered this time and time again on the channel, like several different times we talked about California, that the Medi-Cal program is in something of like a $4 to $10 billion budget deficit. It is way out of money, okay? And actually, we covered it mathematically. The reason that is happening is because of the fact that they're giving too much healthcare to illegals, and they actually this year had to cut back on that a little bit. Now, I guess the illegals have to pay like a $100 a month insurance premium instead of getting the healthcare for free. Yes, that's a real story. And why is that? Because California is going broke. But that again goes back to our central question, right? You wonder why when you vote Democrat, the social services don't actually get better. The benefits programs don't actually get better for Americans. This is why. Because they're embezzling it. Fraud is widespread, by the way, in the Medi-Cal program. But also, secondly, on the political machine front, yeah, they quite literally are just giving it to illegals, okay? So, you know, that's another reason why when I often say that I'm a single issue voter on immigration and everyone else should be as well, this is exactly what we're talking about. Because like basically any issue that you talk about in politics, whether it's, hey, how do we balance the budget? Why are we running out of money as a country? Or if you're a liberal, right? Why can't we afford to give healthcare to everyone? It all goes back to the same central question because of the immigration problem. But instead, you know, Democrats would, of course, never reach that conclusion because this is what they're all about, right? This is the political machine. By the way, you wonder why they're so mad right now over ICE raids and the fact that Trump is cracking down on immigration. Go back to Tammany Hall and wonder why, right? They control elections through this immigration issue, number one, and then build the machine off of that by doing what? Mass corruption and mass fraud. That's exactly it. So anyways, that said, guys, let me know your thoughts. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and until next time, God bless and peace.